The Joseph Rowntree Foundation, they put out a report today showing that basically every single area of the country, child poverty is predicted to rise by 2029. You know the only area that child poverty is predicted to fall? In Scotland. And they explicitly said it's because Scotland has welfare policies, like they got rid of the 2-child benefit cap. It shouldn't be a controversial thing to say is that when you increase welfare for poor children, few of them are in poverty. So if you're living in Scotland, if you're somebody who lives in Scotland and you vote in Scotland, you have a choice. You have the 4-child poverty parties, or you have the Scottish National Party. That is your choice, right? The Green Party aren't going to win, at least not in terms of the constituency Holyrood seats or the Westminster seats. So you can vote for the Greens in your list seat, but if you're going to vote for a constituency, either Holyrood or Westminster, if you want child poverty to go down, the only party you can vote for is the Scottish National Party.
According to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, 14 million people in the UK are thought to be in poverty. 4 million of them children.
Come in.
Axel is 3, his mum Jo Rule 26.
Look, we got the park.
For them, each month presents familiar struggles. Recently, have you experienced the following? Struggled to pay bills?
Yes.
Not had enough money to buy food?
Yes.
Not had any money to decorate your home?
Yeah.
Not had enough money to spend on yourself?
All the time. It's very, very hard. It's mentally draining all the time, and you just feel like giving up half the time, but you can't because you've got to keep going.
This report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation talks explicitly about today's big political topic, economic growth. Even if the economy grows significantly more than expected, that alone, it warns, will have little impact on child poverty rates over the next 4 years.
And that's the thing, right? It's that the Labour Party have staked all of their political capital on the idea that they'll grow the economy and that will increase incomes. And maybe incomes will go up for some people. It depends on Labour market policy, which are usually better than the Tories on. But even so, will that help people who are not in work because they are disabled or because they are full-time carers? Will that actually affect people who are not going to be the beneficiaries of this growth? Well, no, it won't be. And it shouldn't be difficult to understand the idea that economic growth is not a panacea for solving some of the deep-seated social problems in this country that are born out of inequality that growth can't solve because the growth is also continually being distributed unequally. Growth is fine. Growth is a reasonable thing to want to aim for, but it's got to be sustainable, of course, and it's got to be broad-based. And just throwing planning permission towards third runways at Heathrow and growth corridors in Oxford and Cambridge, that's not going to help people out in the northeast, in the northwest, in areas in the country that are poorer, like the satellite areas of Birmingham and the West Midlands, which are already incredibly poor and deprived, that aren't going to be the beneficiaries of this growth if it's all in fucking London and the southeast. Or again, if people are too sick to work or are full-time carers. It's going to be growth for the important cohorts of the electorate, which is the aspirational upper echelons of the employment hierarchy. They could be doing welfare policy to help people, and instead they're trying to take money away from the disabled.
One UK nation does the report predict an improvement by 2029, Scotland. Its child poverty rates are already lower than England and Wales, in part, says the report, due to the Scottish child payment policy, where parents on low incomes like SOAR can get £26.70 a week for each child under 16.
It makes a huge difference, especially with my son, because it is for him.
SOAR lives in Glasgow and is part of the Changing Realities project, which works with low-income families.
And that's the thing, is that every single Conservative, they constantly tell you, oh, well, you can't spend poverty away. You can't just give people money to eradicate poverty. And literally every single time you have a look at any peer-reviewed study, any impact assessment of a policy, every single time, that's just literally the opposite of true. It is so easy to fix poverty. You take money from rich people and you give it to poor people. Really, really simple. Incredibly simple way of solving poverty is you take money from rich people and give it to poor people. Because turns out the cause of poverty is not having enough money. And the nature of free market economies means that you have a stratification in terms of remuneration from that economy. And people at the bottom of that will invariably be in poverty. So how do you fix that? You take from the top and you give it to the bottom. It shouldn't be a complex discussion. Lots of economics is difficult. This is very, very simple. If people don't have enough money, you give them fucking money. Especially if they're kids who are invariably not going to have access to their own incomes and have to rely on their parents. Which you may say, well, you have to entrust parents to be able to make those cases for themselves, to be able to support themselves. But the kids don't have a choice, do they? Kids don't choose to be born into responsible parents or not. You have to meet kids where they are. And anyone on this planet who justifies child poverty by blaming the parents, I'm sorry, I don't think you're fully human.
Like Jo, she's a single parent caring for a young son with additional needs.
So this helps a lot in terms of like if he wants something, I can easily get. Like if he wants a new shoes, I can easily get for him for the child, Scottish child payment I get for him. So that helps me a lot, especially for him, taking care of him.
The lesson from Scotland, say the authors of today's report, address poverty by social security measures like the child payment policy.
They have also committed from next year to bring the two-child limit to an end in Scotland. And it's actually those two policies together, that investment in universal credit in social security, that is making a difference to the poverty rates that we see in Scotland. And this is not to say Scotland has got it all right. They are still some way off meeting their own child poverty targets. But it is that level of ambition that we need to be seeing for the rest of the UK as well.
And that's what's so monstrous about the Labour government, is that you compare them to the Scottish National Party, and the Scottish National Party are the only people who actually have a proper plan to deal with child poverty, and they're still behind where their targets are. She described it correctly. It's ambition that's the thing, is that they want no child to be in poverty. They have an ambition of eradicating child poverty. And what's Labour's ambition? To have a working group for a quango, for a task force to eventually find out a policy that they may or may not do to think about something to do with child poverty. Harold Wilson, the great Harold Wilson, once said that the Labour Party is a moral crusade or it is nothing. And how can you be a moral crusading Labour Party if you can't even admit that child poverty is a problem that you want to solve? And just kick the can down the road by creating a fucking quango and not listening to numerous child poverty charities, or indeed looking at the remarkable and evidence-based success of the Scottish National Party's welfare programme.
The UK government pointed again today to the child poverty strategy it's developing. Also a new debt repayment scheme, which it said will benefit 700,000 of the poorest families with children. Yet still, today's report assesses the child poverty outlook across the UK as shameful.
And it's correct to call it shameful. It's absolutely 100% correct to call it shameful. There's a reason why, in the run-up to the election, us here on the left were describing him as Sir Kid Starver. Because you can see that the evidence is there, that the predictions are there from the experts on terms of child poverty, and under the Labour Party, more children are starving than previously were. That's just the kid starver effect being brought fully to light. Now, one of the big sticking points for the Labour Party is the two-child benefit cap. 7 Labour MPs had the whip removed from them for voting for an SNP amendment to get rid of the two-child benefit cap. Most of these people are not getting the whip back, including Richard Bergen and Zara Sultana, but apparently there are conversations between a couple of people to potentially get the whip back at some point in the future. So this really is a very sore subject for the Labour Party, because it's one of the reasons why Jeremy Corbyn became the leader, because he was the only one who opposed the welfare bill when Harriet Harman whipped to abstain in 2015. There is clearly a divided opinion on this one amongst many members of the public, and this was discussed on the Jeremy Vine show this afternoon. Let's take a look.
One of the country's leading poverty organisations has said that the government must spend more on benefits, as struggling families cannot wait for the economy to improve. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation says that 3 in 10 children are living in relative poverty in this country. They called for focused, deliberate and determined action. They said that that should include allowing parents to claim universal credit or child tax credit for a third child, and I suppose other children after that. The Prime Minister has previously said this is something that he would like to do, but that the government cannot currently afford it until the economy grows. Many children across the country in relative poverty, JJ. Does the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have a point that waiting for the economy to grow is not really feasible for these families?
I have a point, but I think going back to our first discussion about pensions and the triple lock. We have an ageing population. We need to be encouraging people to have kids. It's simply too expensive. I think the government should be doing more to help us have children. I'd have more than one kid if I could afford to, but I live in London and it's expensive enough as it is. The government can do a lot more to encourage parents or encourage people to become parents and have more kids, which is what we need to happen to grow the economy anyway.
Well, in a country where...
And that's true. I mean, I think that that's not the angle you should go with. I think that if you're going to do this kind of dispassionate discussion over, do we need to incentivize people to have kids for economic growth, instead of talking about the absolutely shameful status quo of 30% of kids being in relative poverty, which, again, this is internationally shameful. How else can you describe such a high level of child poverty other than an international disgrace? Which is what it is. It is an international disgrace, and you have George Osborne directly to blame.
Our population is currently exploding with up to 1 million more people a year. Last year, we had 950,000 people who came to live here. Why would we want to have more kids? Because those people, when they come here, are having kids as well. We don't need any more kids.
Because that's how society continues. Our birth rate is below replacement level, you stupid idiot.
We've got an aged population, Carol.
Doesn't matter. We've still got a population that's exploding. People who are coming here to live aren't in their 70s and 80s. They're young people
And they're not
who are
having
coming
kids.
here and settling here. And yes, they are having kids.
But not
I'm sorry, you're entirely wrong.
not at the rate that we need.
I'm sorry. Yes, they are. You know that.
It goes completely against the facts.
We have a declining birth rate in this country, which I think is what GG's saying.
They've just evened out, declining.
And that's the thing as well, is that it doesn't really matter if you have an exploding population as long as you build the public infrastructure. I said it on yesterday's discussion, I'll say it today again. The limit that you have for immigration is how quickly you can increase the public realm to accommodate these people. Now, you can afford this. These are taxpayers who are coming here. These are people coming here to work. These are people who are increasing our productive capacity. That is what is necessary to ensure that you can accommodate them in terms of public sector service provision. But working age people coming here is a good thing because these are the ones paying taxes to support our bloated state pension.
The birth rates and the death rates are now level. There's a report out this week saying they're now about they've evened out. But you know, we've got to stop pretending that we are cruel to people in this country. So if you're in a partnership and you've got 2 kids and one of you is on 60 grand a year, you can still claim the 2-child benefit, which seems insane to me because your other partner's probably working as well. So, we have a welfare bill of 303 billion. We have child benefit bill of 12.5 billion alone.
Okay, so the child benefit bill is way less than the overall total welfare bill because the benefits bill is mostly the state pension. 55% of that is the state pension.
Are not giving kids a hard time in this country. The Joseph Rowntree...
30% of kids are in poverty. And she's out here saying we don't give kids a hard time. Like, where did they dig this witch from? What fantasy novel has she quantum leapt here to come and spread her vexatious bullshit?
Foundation saying living in relative poverty. I would really like to know the definition. It's really hard to pin the Rowntree Foundation down on that. They say a wage that you can just subsist on is 25.5 grand. Not true, frankly, but anyway.
That's basically true at this point. Look at rental prices, look at house prices, look at the cost of having a kid. As I said, I'm on like 23k at the moment, and I'm basically on a break-even position when I have far lower housing costs than everybody else, and I have no children.
And come this September, parents are going to get 30 hours free childcare a week. That's in a year. In the 38 weeks you're allowed to claim it, 1,140 free hours. That frees up more money for people. We are not treating people with kids badly in this country. We're just not.
But when you're talking about...
We absolutely are. We have constantly done this ever since the welfare reforms of the coalition government. This has been roundly condemned. Even the United Nations condemned welfare reforms under the Conservative Party. And this is the current level of child poverty. It's set to explode and increase further until 2029, except in Scotland.
About the most vulnerable in society, as you did when we were talking about the triple pensions lock. You called the elderly the most vulnerable in society. But statistically speaking, there is almost double the amount of children living in the relative poverty, whatever way you want.
I'd like to know what the definition of that is.
Whatever way they're defining it, there is double the amount of children living in that form of poverty than there is the elderly.
That's what's so crazy as well, is that these people, these conservative types, like, it's not even based upon principle. It's just entirely based upon their perception of who is the justified recipient of welfare, to the point at which that the elderly, as has been pointed out by Storm Huntley, who are more likely to be out of poverty, are more justified recipients of the state's welfare spending than children who are more likely to be in poverty, given the fact as well that children are far less likely to be able to look after themselves than the elderly are. To be sure, there are plenty of elderly who can't, but literally every single child who isn't like the age of 16, which is even barely the age you can look after yourself as well, have entirely dependent on the support of their parents. Entirely dependent on their parents. Like, our state pension isn't great. I don't think we should get rid of the triple lock. I don't think we should means test the winter fuel payment. The fact that these people, for basically no reason whatsoever, have decided to entirely defend gigantic, huge amounts of spending from the welfare state on pensions, think that it is beyond the pale that we spend slightly more, an increase from 12 billion to 14 billion, on policies to deal with child poverty by removing the two-child benefit cap, when more children are in poverty than the elderly, and they can't even look after themselves because they're children. Like, you have to be a genuinely damaged human being to take this opinion. Like, somebody in chat, find me, like, an actual, like, utilitarian argument for having this position. I spend so much time on this channel trying to empathise with conservative. I spend so much time on this channel trying to get into the mind of why conservatives think the things that they do so I can better understand why we disagree. My brain cannot find any justification at all for taking this elderly good, children bad approach to welfare spending. Just can't, just literally cannot do it.
Roundtree Foundation.
And therefore, no, I think ONS figures show the same. So, and so when we're looking at the most vulnerable in society, maybe it is children we need to protect.
It is not society's job to pay for everyone's kids. It really is not.
Just pay for everyone's grandparents.
We have 9 million people now who are, what's the phrase, economically inactive, which means...
Well, they're mostly landlords, actually. Most of the economically inactive people are landlords, I think you'll find. And again, she says, well, it's not the role of society to look after everyone else's children. And I think that there's a case to say that we shouldn't just nationalise kids. But no one is making that argument. No one is making that argument. What we are saying is that there should be a robust welfare state in place so that no child is in poverty. I wouldn't say that it is responsibility of the state to look after everyone's kids. It absolutely is the responsibility of the state to eliminate child poverty, to ensure that there is no child going hungry. Zero. If you can't have a welfare state that can't even be justified on grounds of keeping children fed, then I'm sorry, if that's your line for what isn't an acceptable use of the welfare state, I think you're evil.
They're not working. We have this massive wealth pit. We're paying for people not to work. Why should we pay for them to have upwards of,
Every single society pays for people not to work. No capitalist society survives without a welfare state. This has been the case since forever. Every single free labour market has a non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment with which that must exist before we have an inflationary spiral. Every single economy is like this. Every single economy deals with unemployment. You always pay people not to work. We have record low unemployment. The last time unemployment was this low as an extended period was in the 70s. This idea that we've just had this big glut of people being paid not to work, just fundamentally bollocks.
3, 4, 5, 6 children.
So it's fine. So it's fine when it gets when it gets to pensioners. It's fine. We should
yes, it is fine.
It is fine. When it comes to children who have no choice about being born and need a little bit of support, suddenly they're not important.
Pensioners can't work and they're not having kids.
I'm going to put you on pause, JJ. I know you want to come back.
Pensioners can't work. Well, my assumption from that statement is that her justification for this is that she believes in child labour. It's the only thing you can read out of this, is that if the justification for payments to the elderly is because they can't work, then surely you must think that children should work and therefore you believe in the concept of child labour. I'm just iterating from the pieces that she's given me, chat.
We will. We've heard from the panel, almost. After the break, we want to hear from you, though.
I just think that Carol has double standards here. When it comes to us talking about pensioners, she's full on. They're vulnerable. They need all the help they can get. Yeah. When it comes to talking about kids who literally have no other choice to be in that situation, it's suddenly, no.
Hang on. People do have a choice.
Not kids, Carol.
Hang on. People have a choice. Parents have a choice about the number of kids they have. If you can't afford...
And how is that the child's fault? Simple as that. You can't answer this question because you know that you'd be wrong if you did.
6 kids do not have 6 kids.
So, but it's the child who's suffering.
No, but they shouldn't be allowed. We have contraception in this country, so you can't be saying anymore it was by accident, not 5 or 6 times. Why should I, who have no children, be paying money towards people who have 4, 5, 6 children who can't afford them?
Why should I be paying towards your state pension when you've not saved up for a private one? Again, you could make this argument for every single kind of welfare spending. Why should I, as someone who's not disabled, pay for other people who are disabled? Like, you can make all of these arguments because there's a broader social utility argument, which I know that she understands because she's making the same argument for the elderly, but she's not making it for kids. And again, even if she wants to make the argument that, oh, well, if we pay for people to have kids, that's going to incentivize them to have kids they can't afford. The 2-child benefit cap did not lead to a disfertility effect in the families that it affected. This study has already been done. We now know that restricting the 2-child benefit cap did not lead to people having fewer children in those situations. All it did was lead to an increase in child poverty.
What about in the circumstances of things changing? So maybe you could afford the 6 children and then a parent dies, or you could afford 6 children and then somebody
that is entirely
gets made redundant.
different. I know people's circumstances change, but that's not what we're talking about blanket here. Let me just ask you a question. In terms of your life, and you're about to become a mum for the 2nd time, I'm guessing you and Kerr have had a discussion about kids, how many you can afford. Could you? Do you not think that's the sensible discussion for people to have?
Yeah, of course it is. But situations change. So what would happen if, God forbid, something happened to me, and then Kerr was left in a situation where maybe he had 3 children and he was struggling to pay the bills at that point? I suppose that's the people that we're talking about, and they are then the most vulnerable, I'm presuming.
The idea of this cap was to make people on benefits make the same choices as those who work and who depend solely on work. So that's what this was about. And it was so that people on benefits wouldn't just go having 4, 5, 6 kids and the state would have to pay. What you're talking about is an entirely different situation. And yes, that would be taken into account separately. If a partner dies, if suddenly you find yourself in that sort of mess, that's a different story from people who just expect the state to pay for them to have lots of kids.
Except there's no evidence for this, though. Again, there's just no evidence for this at all. And when the studies have been done on the difference in fertility rates amongst these cohorts, pre and post 2-child benefit cap, it did not lead to a significant disfertility effect. So it's not stopped people having kids when they can't afford them. It's just made the kids that they do have more poor.
It does not make sense to me for people who want to have more than 2 kids to expect the state to fund that. People are supposed to...
But they don't do that. They're not expecting it. This happens anyway.
Take charge of their own lives, to take responsibility for their own lives and their own families. It's not the state's job to pay for you having a big family. It really isn't. And people like me who've never had kids, who've never claimed a penny off the state, I resent that. Okay. I really do.
Well, if I die at 60, then I'm going to have to pay into pensions without claiming one. So checkmate, Carol. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.